Okay, let's make some connections again. I'm going to try to show some continuity here also and talk about a continuity that's small, large, and then much larger that goes on. We're going to talk about Egypt and a certain dynasty, and through the dynasties are pretty much the most famous of all, for it contains such things as Akhenaten, the heretic king, and the boy king, King Tut, that everybody knows so much for and is the shining star of the situation. But people actually that came before him and went to him in his lineage and connections that go from that. But we'll also discuss how that goes further. A simple way to discuss that early is to tell you that although these people seem to go out right at this point, there's a continuity from before. For you look at the ancient dynasties and how they figured out how it comes in, and the connectives are when it doesn't go direct. But then that person that ends up being the pharaoh is somebody that's still on a lineage. He may have been something like a grandfather's brother's kid's kid, married with this person that's from this, and this, that, and the other. And so here we start this other dynasty because from there they seem to be doing this a little and doing that a little, and it's been broken down. And just the ages and the way that they do that is even under question itself, or if you believe in Manetho or this, that, and the other, and you can get 110 to 150 a year float out of situations in certain parts. Well, I guess what holds it all together is it seems like they have at certain key points about exactly right because there's other corroborating information. So with this, we'll show some corroborating information. Now, this is the Egyptian mummy. It's well preserved, and all this series of them that we're going to look at are, it seems like they were at the height of their mummification process in here. And though it's in a later dynasty, for this is Tutmos IV, and he's the 8th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. We'll talk about much earlier dynasties and how this goes. But if you know anything about Egyptology and the way they figured it out, the children that go direct are fine, but the other ones are given prominent positions and so on through a mass schooling that they go through, a lot of times ending up being scribes and so on, and that's how later they make the correlation that this dude has that. Whenever you look at their epitaphs that they have for that king or pharaoh that had happened, some of those things will tell you. It's weird. He has epitaphs that say that he was the king of the stables, or this, that, and the other, a scribe, or he was a priest and doing these things. And it's because of the lineage that come before and what he was growing up and studying, just like you'd now have a child today that was going certain ways, and you might have one that's in religion and one that was into science and one, whatever. So he ruled way back in the 14th century BC, but the lineage comes off as the son of Amenhotep II, and he himself is the father of Amenhotep III. So there's this differential of name, and people quite often have said, well, then why wouldn't they have the names that go directly to each other? There's quite a few reasons I've discussed before, where all of a sudden Ramses or Seti, and now that goes with Seth, and that people were separated by hair color, it seems, even in their necropolises of the common people in the later times. In the first times, a lot of this deification and all this really went on mainly with nobility. But this lineage carries through. The most recent that we've done, which is a couple of years old now, is a study of a necropolis from up in the middle area of Egypt. And they got over 100 genetic studies to it. And it passed, people were using this thing from way back in Middle Kingdom all the way through, so before the Hyksos and things like that ever, all the way through Roman times. And what they were able to look at, what they wanted to see, was the radical change that had gone on. and how when the Persians came in and this, that, and the other, at least they would find it in some of their mummies and so on and else. But no, they ended up finding a continuity that went all the way through Roman times and then faded out different. And the reason they stopped at that point into it too is that we well know history and how Islamic and things like that happened and came up into the area now. And they said, well, all the samples we've got, the people that are living there now have about a 1% connection to it. And there's a large connection to other people who used to live in this area. We'll get into that here shortly. I don't know if you've taken a good look at it where I've been yammering away here. But the man has red hair, and it's not that strawberry blonde that we also see, for it's that weird dark red hair, that burgundy. And that's kind of a special thing too, a little bit different. Kind of like, let me see, Danny from the Partridge Family. He had red hair, and then that one sister that was freckled kind of did too, but she was like a strawberry blonde kind of looking. And he had that real dark wine burgundy looking hair. You might call it auburn and so on. That's the way his normally looks. And they made a note that they have some henna highlights that are painted onto it and so on else, but this is things that they did, just like nowadays they put on makeup and make you look real good for your funeral. They literally didn't have to do that. They were, in this way, they were doing this for the afterlife, because once these priests saw him after this point, they had been embalmed and so on, they wrapped him up in what you could still see around his neck, tightly over their whole body, and then pretty much like a cocoon. Well, people have often commented on their skin and the way that it looks, and that a lot of them you can see it's just emaciated away, and what you would think that a corpse would look like, and then especially something that had been dehydrated, and it would make sense. But if you look at the left eyelid, I guess there you can tell that it's a kind of a reddish tan color, whereas the rest of it is darker. Well, what they figured out a long time ago, but then now recently, after analysis, after people have a bunch of databases, often gas chromatographs and things like that, they took some of these flicks of this black stuff that's just really a paint over the top of their skin here, right? It's almost like a lacquer or shellac. And they put them in this cocoon and then wrap them up like a cocoon. Of course, they're going to be reborn like a butterfly here, and the ceremonies that go along with that. I've talked about a lot of this in other videos, so we'll just go on. And when they flick this stuff off of him, like you can see some flicking around his chin and below his lip, they took up these pieces off of here and check it out, and it's like bitumen, like tar. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, like roofing tar type stuff. But you can cook that down, and out what'll seep out of that. So if you have some natural spring thing hooked up to it, or some warming type thing, if you will, it'll exude out like a kerosene type of stuff, and you can actually use the kerosene and dilute it. For it's not soluble in water; it's a petroleum thing, so it's oil. So oil and water, it's just like blop. It looked like a lava lamp with little blobs, and it wouldn't never, which is actually wax water, but then that's petroleum based, and never mind. So what they figured out was it was the shellac that had been thinned down, and I guess a good way to talk about bitumen and stuff, it's what's talked about being in the ark and sealing boats and stuff, so people used it for a lot of purposes like that, and people have found derivatives of this that are holding arrows on, even though they're tightly woven on afterwards and tied. But it's a sealer. It can in trying to make it into a thick viscous stuff, you can end up doing that and then cook it and dry it out, and it ends up being a glue type of device. But in this situation, it really thinned out to a shellac, and the major components they find in it, what's weird is something spiked out, and it's pine tar resin, which most of you would think of that statement as being like, you mean on baseball bats? Well, that's the same type of thing, bitumen or whatever. It's pine, but it's made from pine tar, so it can be formed a totally different way. But these are in pine trees, and there are no pine trees in ancient Egypt even. So where does this all come from? Well, this all pine tree stuff comes from Europe. It's one of two species, and I never heard back on exactly which one it is because I guess they didn't like that and had to stop on that one again, like anything that points to something like that. But in the process, it's got to be one of two, and both are up in Europe. One heavily above the Black Sea area and up the Altai Mountains, and the other one actually much more over to the Western Europe. So we'll make other connections. So here he is, and the problem with making a full connective, like, well, indeed it would take quite some connective videos of time, especially the way I go yammering on, right? To take from the earliest dynasties on. But there are some gaps and some missing places and some questions about, of course, whenever it breaks apart and it's back to a north and south Egypt separated somewhat, if these are overlapping and who goes who to what, which is part of what changes things over 150 years if you go playing around with it a little bit. And there's, of course, missing mummies all through this, and especially as older it goes, it have this effect, for they'd been rummaged long ago, and long ago again, and way back when, still rummaged already. So we were lucky to find anything that goes back in these times, but you look at these earliest statues and it shows you something quite evident. We'll talk about that as we go on, and I think I'm sick of looking at this picture, and we'll go on, but God, I had much more to say. You can see the aquiline features here, the slide overbite the guy has. Look, I've got a slide overbite. If I put my bottom teeth and front teeth together, I have a little gap between my chew. I have to actually put my front teeth in front of that, like, oh, biting through an apple or whatever you will. And whenever I do so, I have that chew going on there. I say it's all prevalent to all North Africa and Mediterranean people on through there too, but so we have this reddish hair here that we can easily find, and Caucasian appearance. But so who is he? Well, he's the son of Amenhotep and the father of Amenhotep III. So then we get the second and third variant of that. But he's also the grandfather of ends up being Akhenaten, right? So he was really Amenhotep IV, and then he changed his name to Akhenaten whenever they started going to the sun god Aten. That's very important too. Well, I wanted to do a piece in a video that I left out from a while ago, and I guess I could mention it now, but I don't want to flash to the picture of it necessarily, but I do want to get into another picture and another portion of this topic and the lineage here. But when you get to King Tut and you look at his chair that's put inside there, that's not even his chair. And people have tried to make comments, and he's this, that, and the other. Well, if you look, that's got that Aten sun disk with the hands onto it, and so that's probably his father's furniture. And the reason he had so much was maybe this was a stash from the others going to be looted. In fact, it looks like each one had already been looted for the good stuff, and so some little gold foiled things and stuff are along in his chair and this, that, and the other and stuff. It was all thrown into Tut's stuff. I recently did a video showing you all the things found in Tut's, and how they go, well, this even looks like it was made for a girl, and some of these effigies were this, and this, that, and the other. It doesn't make sense, and the mask, and the way that just doesn't all fit together, and how they had made his tomb, and the way even the tomb turns in the incorrect way for him, so they must have used somebody else's tomb to do that. And of course, was all this in a way to throw off everybody until we found it, or was it just a luck find because people were assured, even just a couple of generations later, that he wouldn't have anything of value if he even knew where it was, don't even need to look anymore, and everything else has been plundered. And then a couple of generations later, because of damnatio memoriae, which is where they blot somebody out basically, he wasn't discussed again, and therefore by those few generations nobody even knew he existed till somebody came back and went through the lineages and go, well, where's this guy at? He's got to be here somewhere. And they found him with that cachet. Grandfather of Akhenaten, which is also the father of Tut. Therefore, this man is the great-grandfather of King Tut. So I have a connected lineage, and this guy's a dark auburn hair. But there are more connections that go to the same people. For if we go to the next, this is the Egyptian mummy of Queen Tut. She is a closely associated date, and she was the wife of Pharaoh Amenhotep III that we talked about, the mother of Pharaoh Akhenaten. This was the mother of the heretic king, if you will. If you want to look at him as being the guy that took on the first monotheism or whatever, is the first Jesus type character or something like that that goes along with it. A lot of people take this lineage here, and because of biblical timelines and so try to make connections. I'll try to steer away from that a little bit, but it keeps coming up again. But she's the Pharaoh Akhenaten's mother, and therefore also the grandmother of Tutankhamun. And here's her mummy done quite well, and it looks like that there's only a few cases where they did this, where it's like Ramses and a few others, which we'll see his picture here shortly, where it's done so good. For some reason, they think that that's what it was. It was done so well that they went ahead and left out the deal about painting them over with bitumen. But you look at her hair, and you can see some real bright orange highlights a little on the top right, and especially in the bottom left of it a little bit there, equal to her mouth or a little below. But the rest of her hair is that dark red burgundy color too. It's probably what you would refer to as auburn. And ladies that do your hair probably know, just like fingernail polish, there's 1,000 different shades and cute little names that go off. Mojave and sunset or some kind of graph. That's what it really would look like. But we're just going to go with not bright orange like you would think of as a ginger necessarily, which is somewhat of a strawberry blonde, but red really, like the bright spots there, but her natural hair that's here. She has a couple other wigs too, and conspicuously there's a wig that's supposed to be attached to these people, and it has darker hair and lighter hair, like a brown hair and a blonde hair mixed together in strands that also runs around with bands around it and everything. Hopefully you've seen that before. So this is a grandma of King Tut, the Pharaoh Akhenaten's mother itself. Here now again, in that same lineage, is another one that's showing up with an auburn type hair red. They made the comment, well, look, she's supposed to have been so old and this, that, and the other. Well, they dyed her hair back, and it's red. Now, would she have been any different color? No, they've looked at it under a microscope, and they've actually figured out, like they did with Ramses and a bunch of others, that, well, that's a naturally red hair. Probably wouldn't have been that bright necessarily, but henna doesn't pull that all off herself. She may have been graying in her old age, and they highlighted her hair back again. You know, because also see that she was severely used to wearing a wig because she's had a receded hairline that goes back. You can see that in people that wear a lot of wigs nowadays. They lose their edges and it just starts carving back. So then they have to wear a wig to end up making up for that. And then, oh my God. Yeah, this is a very happy looking mummy. You look at the left side of it and she just looks very content. In fact, a lot of them do. There's very few that don't, but there's a few that they've pointed out that, man, they sure do have a content look on their face. Even in a modern embalmer will look at that and go, wow, that's fantastic. But now let's look again at somebody that goes back from this before and coming in, 8th, 9th, 10th dynasty, or 10th pharaoh, and working its way through this 18th dynasty. For this is the Egyptian mummy of Thru. She's the great grandmother of Tutankhamun. And you can see here that she has a somewhat strawberry blonde hair. And recently in a video I made, I showed where even some of the archaeologists there were talking to it, and it had Joanne Fletcher talking about it, and she was just amazed over how well this mummy was done, and the fact that she really wasn't coated with too much bitumen, and so you could see where the process turned her from her normal look to a beef jerky color, and that her eyes are even open and have these sockets to them and so on, and her curlyish light hair, the blonde wavering. I asked the lady about it, and they said something about, well, maybe the natron process. The problem we have with that is a lot of people that went through the natron process have black hair, and it didn't do anything to it. And brown hair, and it didn't do anything to it. And blonde hair that's ash colored, and they didn't do anything to it. And then some lighter blonde hair, we're about to see some of that, and it didn't do anything to it. In fact, red hair, and it doesn't appear to have done anything to it. So a doctor, hearing all these professions and everything that people were trying to throw at it, just went ahead and got some of that natron and went through the exact process, and not even on a mummy, for they just took different people's hair and put it in this natron for the time of the process and see what would happen. Well, lo and behold, none of them changed a shade. So that was definitive, right? Well, from what I hear, they went ahead and left some in it and let it go for over a year now, and that doesn't change. No, the process wouldn't do it, and if it did, there wouldn't be any dark-haired people. Unless you're going to say something special happened, something special happened. Well, they've looked at it under a microscope, and they go, no, this person was a blonde. And of course, there's different types of hair for different types of people. And other than that, there's the phenotype of this lady. For if you really got the chance to look at her head on, she looks like an English farm woman. A lot more like it than you'd think. Strange thing, she's got those eyes on there, right? We talked recently about Egyptian blue and how it has a strange effect that it only shows up a weird glow just in ultraviolet light. Like if you've ever gone to an amusement park or something like that, they'll put a stamp on you if you're going to go in and out. When you come back in, they put this pin light above you and hit that, and you can see this glow, and it's today's symbol or whatever, and they go, yeah, come on in. And anyhow, that only shows up under that certain line. Well, a guy has said that whenever he went around with one of those, checking this stuff out, after the report was that there were a lot of statues that even showed up like that, he found a few of them. They wouldn't let him film or anything whenever he was doing it, but he went around with the spin thing and popped it on and off. And one of the things he said was her eyes glowed. If you look, they're kind of opened, and they've put something pouch inside there and then made a drawn little fake eye. But earlier in the dynasties, not to the mummies, but to their statue effigies, they did these special eyes they made out of marble, and they ended up using white marble that had red little scribbles in it for the white part of your eyes, and then their eyes are blue, a little crystal blue, and they had a section behind it, a little dot into it, and really it looked like the thing was looking at you. We'll try to look at those maybe in a little bit. Let's go ahead and go through this. And well, so that was her grandma, huh? Also, so what did great granddad look like? Well, here's the mummy of Yuya, the father of Tai, and the husband of Thuya we just looked at. Now, so now we're looking at a lineage and these people that we've all figured out. There you are, and okay. You look on the left-hand side, and you can probably clearly make out that this person looks like, I don't know, Greg Norman, the golfer. Has an alkaline nose, blondish type features. Even though he's been well shaved, he still has a slight mustache and chin beard that's going on that would happen. Your hair keeps growing just a hair whenever you die, fingernails and so on. And then your skin recedes in this process some. But look how full he is. Like, they did that real good on him. They did cover him up with the bitumen tar and the pine tar type stuff and lacquered him somewhat, but boom, he still showed up good. It shows you how thin it was because even his eyebrow hairs and eyelashes are poking through that, and his blonde hair. And so they were both blondes. And she looked a little more strawberry than he is, somewhat. But also, he's one of the guys that they had the ancient pictures of, that I've showed in other videos, of black and white. From almost the angle of the picture on the right, a lot of people made the comment, and the one from the side view, about how he looks like Abraham Lincoln. Well, Abraham Lincoln looks kind of gaunt and emaciated during his elder age, and has his looks and everything, as you can easily see on any picture of it and everything. But sure, somebody that's sucked in like a mummy or vampire, ha ha ha. There you go. Have you ever seen that thing with vampire Abe Lincoln? And it never mind. It's not a show of it. But Here's another blonde lineages that go on through. And so Thuya and Yuya, father of that Tai. And now, how can we get lineage out of that? Well, there seems to be a break, of course, between what is the 18th dynasty and the 19th dynasty, as we spoke about before. And in fact, every one of them, there's that little glitch. A lot of people have made the connective, well, this was this, and this was this guy's daughter, and these were his son, and so they married, and they did this, so that made him the most eligible person. Other times there was somebody had a dream, and they dug out the the lion of Sphinx, which also shows you that it was buried a lot of times, and natural processes, and was something that they kept even the way that people look at it today. But I don't want to get into Sphinx. Man, before I started it and I got to this point in my thoughts, I realized I could go way off in left field. Let's just continue with this continuity here. We're looking at Ramses. And so, especially from the side here, you can see that he has that little bit overbite, has that good pointy chin, right, onto him, but extreme lack of prognathism, aquiline type nose. Now it bends down and stuff, but if you had your brains pulled out of your nose, it'd end up getting a little flappy and screwed up, especially if it was during the process where you were trying to rot and they dehydrated you. And he has that, what we'd call a conspicuous Greek-looking bald spot, where everything is still hair except for bald right on top. Much like Caesar or something like that. But he has a reddish hair. People notice that there's no way. This guy was from like 1279 to 1213 BC, and he reigned, and he was whatever 14 whenever he got to the throne, so he'd have been like 91, 92 years old. There's no way he still had red hair. Well, you look at Donald Trump, he's kind of a strawberry, if you will, kind of thing, but you look at him and he's still holding a little bit of his color, but it's gone gray. What they realized is he put henna back in his hair. The statement is back to the color of his youth. They've taken a couple of pieces of his hair whenever they shipped him back and forth here and did a preservation on him with experts in Europe and sent him back, but they got a couple of pieces of hair out of that and checked it out, and they go, no, he was a redhead. Over and above the fact that they hinted it back to the color of his youth. So now he's the predecessor of the pharaoh of Seti I. And so people have talked about, well, there was Ramses, and then why is there Ramses II here, which is the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. It's a little later, but we can still see a continuity of people and an overstretching and an overlapping from the sides, if you will, from people who ended up being people's uncles and things like that, from reigns that go before that are still in power, that pulled off, that whenever he didn't have an heir to the throne, stepped in as the most holy or most godlike, if you will. These people were gods on earth. A lot of it shows. And his predecessor is Pharaoh Seti, and then we have that Seth connection too, and Seth's known to be a redhead. And you look at Seti, and he's got this gaunt face that almost looks like, Christopher Reeve's Superman, if you will, mummified somehow, but again painted up with that bitumen. But here's something special about this old man. Even the old man, his old skin, everything else, maybe it helped that he had made it to such an ancient age, but they didn't have to bitumen him very much either, and you can see his natural color of his skin, and it didn't even beef jerky that fantastically. And sure, you think, well, he must have been an old guy, barely able to. No, that's just the way it looks after you mummify them, and they shrink up like you put somebody in the desert and they die, and they shrunk up like beef jerky. In fact, it darkens and looks like beef jerky quite often. But again, you pull your brain out through your nose, and it'll do a little bit of that to it. Actually, even modern people that look at this for the forensics go, that's pretty amazing. So we can see somewhat of a continuity here, but there are other mummies that we can't find that go in between these situations. There is a few, and I could have shown you pictures of those too off into it, but it's not very telling at all, like these are necessarily. And the rest of them that we can get effigies of are basically coffin lids and on a wall someplace or someplace else. And of course, that's just done in a little ideological look. So you can't looking at the real person here. You're looking at a photoshopped, if you will, kind of glamour shots form of themselves. It's done in weird ways. In fact, hey, Akhenaten that we are running all over here and now past, he changed up that look and made it all of a sudden look quite different. There's reason for that. Did a video about that too, where people were saying, was he gay? Was this going on? Was that going on? Yeah, real actual archaeologists were trying to bounce around this question. Seems like to be tried to be made for a TV show, and it's like, really, really. I mean, like long ago we were assured of nah, no, yeah, no, no, yes. In fact, both of those two yeses. Anyhow, so this Seti and this reliving going through may have had connections to Seth Peribsen, and of course that seems to be the second pharaoh that comes out of it. But when we look at the lineage that came out just before Ramses and where it came from, because you think, oh, Ramses isn't really connected to that, is he? Well, we talked about scribes and uncles and things like that, and uncles, of course, come from the same grandfather. And then there's great grandfather, great 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 grandfather. And so when you say somebody has this, that's not necessarily the way that it goes. See, I hear quite often that all people came from a blue-eyed guy that lived at about 8,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago, rough area, somewhere right up in the northern Caucasus mountain area range in the Black Sea and so on. And while that's true, and that all blue-eyed people are supposedly related to that person, the untruth point of that is that he had a great 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 grandfather and they pull that off too. It's just that it seems like this locus variant that they find in genetic alleles and say, oh, here it is, that's blue eyes. I mean, I can just, if it shows up in the machine, we're just like, yeah, I mean, we've done this so many millions of people now, we're like, yeah, they got blue eyes if they got that number. And you'd have to say, well, look at this picture. This is, right? So, and there has been no discrepancies. But lo and behold, we know that before this time, there was a grandfather, great grandfather, and he must have it. We don't have him. But when people say something like Genghis Khan and all these things in the lineage come from it, I watched a lecture where a guy was giving on that, and he had previously done one on that, and he was talking about this situation here, and somebody came and asked him the question. They go, you know, that Genghis Khan thing, you say that all came from it. Are you talking about like him himself? And he brought up the fact that Ramses is supposed to have fathered quite a few kids. And if you said, well, that's very, and then they had kids, and they had kids, and you know, man, the family reunion whenever your grandpa is going to be hellish. Especially if it involves your uncles and cousins and things like that. Their lineages on top of it. We're going to, oh my gosh. Are you talking about that? Are you figuring in the other fact and the cousins and the great 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 grandpa? And he goes, yeah. And he says that apply to this blue-eyed situation. And he goes, well, yeah, of course. But blah blah blah, and we can only find it. But nobody ever wants to mention that little thing there, and they try to talk about, well, there's this one guy. Well, here, let's just destroy that little fact. They have found Cro-Magnon man. Well, when they found the skeleton, they labeled this version. He's from Puglisi Cave from roughly about 30,000 years ago. I think it's 28,600, give or take 450. But let's, his genetics, they finally were able, by this way that they've developed recently, that they used on the pharaohs recently, and got forth these genetics that passed through Roman times, I talked about earlier, was used in the same situation. In fact, it was the predecessor and helped them with it. And they said, you know, what's weird here is his haplogroup genetics are still here today. So now if you look up Cro-Magnon, it'll go, no, we're going to call it early European modern humans. Funny thing is, the the mtDNA and even Y-DNA that shows up in that shows up all through the Middle East and all the way down through Egypt and so on. And people are like, what? And all around the Mediterranean. I mean, what would stop it? In ancient times, all the way through to India, all the way to China, Terran Basin mummies. Oh, they got pyramids up there too, bud. Yeah, it's probably pretty much for a different video, but so when we look at something like this, Tutankhamun believes the haplogroup R1b1a2, which more than 50% of all male and Western European belong to. Less than 1% of the modern Egyptians belong to this haplotype. Well, I had a guy talking to me, or probably pretty much arguing with me recently, and about how he was this and this, that, and the other, and da 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 because of so and so. And I go, man, even you can dicker back and forth about pictures and crap, but even modern DNA says not a chance. And what's odd about this is one of the people that this guy mentions, who is a major contributor here, that they know is in that same exact haplogroup, is some of the leaders of places, and then also in Europe, and then also one of them would be Tsar Nicholas of Russia, for they had his genetics from way back when, and then once they run that through the machine and got a good spike off of it, they're like, well, he's R1b with me. So wouldn't it be odd to find out that Tutankhamun has that? And they say, well, 50%, and I had some guy in another video just recently here, a couple of weeks ago, arguing about how, well, he didn't even have any kids that lived. They had the two that didn't, so how does that even happen? Well, so now we go back to that same topic again of, well, he had a dad and a granddad, and everybody I've been showing you here off of it, and it's that lineage that was a continentation, right? In fact, that ends up taking over after Tut and goes on through like that, that was the master of one part of his army fleet and so on, has continuity in that same situation. Then it continues, just like I talked about, but it goes in the way back machine from way, way back. You're like, well, at what point did these people that had blue eyes and stuff like that show up, and blonde hair and red hair and stuff show up in Egypt? And it's like, well, before it was Egypt, for sure. We're really called Libya. The place used to be called Kemet, but man, if we look here at Ginger, the pre-dynastic Gibelline mummy that dates from, well, it says approximately 3,000. I think they give you 3150 and float to the other side 250 years, so it could be 3,000 to almost 3,300. Irregardless, you can make it out there. He's got this blondish curly hair. Well, it's touching on strawberry blonde, and they call him Ginger from that effect that's there. Sure, he looks like beef jerky somewhat, but take you out and put you in a desert and let you turn into beef jerky, and you're going to look that color no matter how pale you were for anything started. But these people would have had a decent tan on their situation. Other neat effect that they found with him is this pottery and stuff that leads to the Badarian, the Kata cultures, and so on. And there's a continuity that actually literally you can run through pottery styles all the way up to Europe. In fact, some of the effigies they show that end up procuring into Isis, and this goddess in a ballerina type pose with her arms up, ends up going into that and that effect on pottery. And then you can find this situation going back at least 16,000 years in cave art and stuff that goes back pre-pottery, Neolithic. I've shown that in other videos too. So not only is there thru and yu and da 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 and everything, which they try to say, hey man, that's Joseph of the Bible then, and this, that, and the other, and da da da. And maybe he came into Egypt and all. No. These are the Egyptians from the pre-dynastic. But you can look at other people like Nofret and Rahotep, and they're in 4th dynasty. And these crystal eyes, you look up crystal blue-eyed, well, just look up blue-eyed Egyptians to show you these crystal statues of all them, and of course scribes, which would have been the cousins and the second in line that didn't, and all those type situations. And All the way up through the 12th dynasty, they use these crystal blue eyes, and then it fades away. Apparently, the knowledge of it goes away. It's one of the ooh parts of Egypt. They're like, well, that was pretty cool, and how come it went away? Because that looks real cool. It's like the eyes follow you like it's real. You know, that's amazing. Yeah. I'll show you a couple of pictures of those, but in real close up here in a second. But it's quite the phenomenon where they found a crystal blue eye, and they're able to do something like that with it. Well, it's just getting out here, but so here's Hor-Aha, and a lot of people have said, well, that's a guy from the 12th dynasty and so on. Even they found it in this other tomb and so on, was kept from that. And other people have said that may be supposed to be a representation of Hor-Aha. That's Horus the Younger. That's the second guy ever. And people even say that may be King Scorpion and the whole situation. But you look across these guys that are just reaching out, and you can find Buddha that looks that way, and South American gods that are bearded, where no Indians have that going on, and Sumerians, like in here too. And there'll be a Greek statue down here coming rolling in a second. The great Sumerian bearded gods. And I've quite often said that, man, you know, in the Louvre Museum, they've got a Narmer, which is supposed to be, you know, King Menes, Narmer, from the beginning of Egypt is supposed to be there. And they've got a statue that's this exactly right here with this funny beard that looks like that. That's not the little stick-on beard that they do all this thing that comes later. And lo and behold, he has that effect too. But there's a continuity. And what is it? Well, it's in people that have genetics that would have blue-eyed effects. And people try to make weird things out of it. Oh, look, this guy's got this genetic defect and made his eyes blue, and it's like, stop. Well, here's one that has bluish or blue-green eyes, and like, yeah, he's kind of an admix person a little bit. And if you look into the other half of his admix, I guarantee that's what you're going to be seeing. So it's kind of where it comes from. You can even find, famous Nefertiti, and everybody threw a big fit last year whenever she did her deal, and I did a few videos about it, but that's one blue eye right there. Her other eye's missing, but that's that same crystal blue eye, and that is later in the 12th dynasty, but it's the anomaly. And there's been people said, man, you know what? It's possible to get those eyes that they went back and found an old scribe and knocked his eyes out. There's a couple that don't have them. But they've also found other ones that have reserve heads and they have extra eyes that aren't even used. Well, I guess they didn't know about that one or didn't find it, for they might have used these other ones. But even South American gods, and then Buddha, through whatever civilization that you see him at, is quite often shown in that way, and I've shown that also in other videos, and it's reality of that situation. But these crystal blue eyes we're looking at are not painted, and they're not lapis lazuli eyes of the Sumerians that we're seeing right there. You know, they're crystal blue, like, I don't know if it makes it out right in here in the very bottom. Here, there, that's gone out now somewhat. It's a little different, but it shows us significant. Here it is in the Greeks, and nobody would make a question out of that. And you go, well, see that unibrow type thing and how it's carried on for the Sumerians? Oh yeah, so they did somewhat similar art. You go, no, look, they got blue eyes too. Do I have to make all these connections for you? These people that are doing this stuff and building these great things and the architecture, sacred geometry, they get it all together, bam, man, yeah. In fact, you can see even blue encrusted eyes and stuff that leads back to the time of the people of Göbekli Tepe, Catalhoyuk, these guys. So it makes sense. When people used to talk about the Wayback Machine, they go, oh, you went crazy now. And they were cavemen. And it's like, now we find out that ain't going on. In fact, there was this people that were quite more advanced than most everybody else at one time. And they seem to have heralded civilization to all of these type of people and brought something to them that they previous to it did not have. And you can find that in horses and the wheel and written knowledge and things like that. Some people in modern day kind of mull over that situation. Others try to mask it and try to go, oh no, you're just talking about blah blah blah. Oh, you can look at things like this and it's undeniable what they themselves still show to this day. Yeah, you can find it in a lot of old ancient art. But is everything exactly like that today? No, it's not quite the same as what it used to be. It's not quite the same what it once was in these very similar places. For we'd all recognize that looking down on it, even though it's been tried to be covered up by planting trees like a plantation over it. Strangely, they're drawn in perfect rows, and so if you got anything off angle, our mind automatically picks up the dot sequence. This is from Chinese mummies and pyramids that are there. And this is not something that's, oh, they've got one? No, they've got hundreds of them. Yeah. And while they maybe up close seem to be covered up with foliage somewhat and almost look like, oh, big mounds that you can even find in the Americas that are built up and stuff and other places. And ancient tells that we find and so on, knock knock. Lo and behold, below that dirt that's been put all over it, that's a pyramid, and then they've even just let things grow on it. Why, if they've got this whole thing set up to where you can come and check it out, why would they mask it? What? Oh, huh. So huge, expansive. This is not one of the larger ones in any way, but say inside of those probably contains riches like you'd find in King Tut's tomb. Only due to bureaucracy and Chinese and the way everything goes, not really getting any access to that situation. In fact, after we got the Terran Basin mummies and the things that came out of that, and it showed genetics that attached to Europe and so on. And in fact, whenever we found those terracotta warriors, the genetics they found attached to that went also in that same situation. That kind of went slowly, but right before that, they said, we're going to be busy for the next couple of 100 years. Oh boy, handshake, disappear. But that's for another video. So how far off were the genetics of somebody like King Tut and somebody we'd know of recently as Princess Di? And it might surprise you to know that I think they're identical. Yeah, she's got at least a 50-50 shot on it without even testing. I know from what's been said on the other side, that connects, not necessarily to this lineage, just with other ones. And so that's how we get that folding and overlapping situation. But be it here, they have that genetics from Cro-Magnon, and it goes back so many thousands of years ago, but that's in and from that CT and R and all these come from that. So it shows a connection that goes back way, way